1968 and 1969 each had something in common. They were aged between 25 and 32 years old, were all married, were all brunettes, lived in Glasgow, had their periods at the time, and had gone for a night out to the Barrowlands Ballroom, a dance and music venue in the city, known locally as the Barrowlands. Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puttock had separately gone out, leaving their children in the care of family at home. They never returned. All were choked to death, and their bodies dumped just a short distance from where they lived. It was concluded by the police that the three women were murdered by a suspected serial killer who was dubbed Bible John by the police, as he was overheard quoting from the Bible during a taxi journey with his final victim and her sister before she was murdered. He had quoted scriptures from the Bible and to have condemned adultery. There was a widespread fear that a serial killer was on the loose, preying on women on the dance floor. This individual has never been identified, and the cases remain open, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in Scottish criminal history, with the police interviewing around 7,000 people, taking over 4,000 statements, and putting out an early version of a photo fit of the suspected killer. No arrests have been made to date. It all began on the 23rd of February 1968, when the naked body of a 25-year-old auxiliary nurse, Patricia Docker, was discovered in a doorway of a lock-up garage in the alleyway behind 27 Carmichael Place, in the Battlefield area of Glasgow. Her body was only a couple of streets away from her home at Langside Place. The corpse had evidence of extensive injuries to the face and head. Death was caused by strangulation, and it was noted that she was having her period. Her handbag, watch, clothes, and jewellery, apart from her wedding ring, were missing, except for her shoes. Her clothes were never found, but the handbag was later recovered from the River Cart by an underwater search team. Her watch and bracelet were also recovered from the water. Intensive door-to-door inquiries in the area found a witness who recalled possibly hearing a female twice briefly shout, "Let me go," the previous evening. This witness stated she could not detect if the female was in distress, as she heard no screams or sounds of commotion. Little evidence was found at the crime scene. The victim's father identified his daughter's body the following day. A post-mortem confirmed the cause of death had been strangulation, and that Docker's body bore no clear evidence of sexual assault. It also found that the time of discovery showed that she had likely died several hours prior to the finding of her body. Docker was a married mother with a young child and was estranged from her husband. On the night of her murder, her parents had been under the impression she would spend the evening dancing at the Majestic Ballroom on Hope Street, although for unknown reasons, she is believed to have chosen to spend the majority of the evening at the Barrowlands, possibly because of the Over 25s night, which it hosted every Thursday. 10 days into the police investigation, a witness was found who said he had seen Docker at the venue. Police were ultimately unable to find any reliable or detailed sightings of her at either the Majestic or Barrowlands that evening. When she failed to return home, her parents assumed that she had spent the night with a friend. Docker's murder had occurred at around midnight. A sighting of a white Ford Consul 375 driving on an adjacent road shortly before midnight was ruled out when the occupants came forward. By March, 700 of the city's 1,300 taxi drivers had been questioned. It was unclear how the victim had actually travelled home on the night in question. A few weeks later, an anonymous letter was posted from the north of England by a woman police believed may have been in Glasgow city centre on the night of the murder, and who may have known the identity of the killer. Details of the letter were released to the press, and police publicly appealed for the woman to come forward, saying the information in the letter was vital. She never did. The trail went cold, but warmed up on Saturday the 16th of August a year later, when 31-year-old mother of three, Jemima MacDonald, decided to spend the evening dancing at the Barrowlands. She went there on regular occasions, and when she did, her sister, Margaret O'Brien, took care of the kids. Around midnight, she was spotted by several people with a young, well-dressed and well-spoken man of slim build, aged between 25 and 35, and around 6 feet tall. The man was also noted as having short hair, variously described by witnesses as being fair, ginger, or dark brown. She was seen leaving around half midnight with the man and walking towards Main Street in the general direction of her home. The last confirmed sighting of her was made by a neighbour at 12:40 a.m. She was standing with a man at the entrance to the derelict property where her body was later discovered, and the neighbour observed that she appeared to have been quite unconcerned. O'Brien became worried when her sister failed to return home. She began hearing local rumours that young children had been seen leaving a derelict tenement building in McKeith Street, discussing a body they had seen there. By Monday morning, O'Brien was so concerned that, fearing the worst, she walked to the old building, where she discovered her sister's extensively battered body lying face down, with her shoes and stockings lying beside her. A post-mortem revealed that the victim had been badly beaten around her face before being strangled to death, possibly with her own stockings. Her murder had occurred approximately 30 hours before the discovery of her body. Like Docker, MacDonald had a period at the time of her death and was discovered fully clothed. Door-to-door inquiries did not turn up any further useful information. Glasgow police realised there were several striking similarities between the murders of Docker and MacDonald. Both women had attended the Barrowlands ballroom the evening of their murder and had been badly beaten before being strangled, had their periods and their handbags taken. Initially, it was thought that both murders were not the work of the same person. The investigative trail went stone cold, despite public appeals. Police had little information, owing to both a lack of witnesses and hard evidence. The investigation also had been severely hindered by not discovering until 3 days after her death that Docker had attended the Barrowlands prior to her murder. Following the discovery of MacDonald, police became aware of remarkable similarities to the murder of Docker. Police could not conclusively link both murders to the same perpetrator, but they could not completely discount this theory. In addition, they were certain the perpetrator held a high degree of local geographical knowledge. They may have been a stranger to the immediate district, as none of the eyewitnesses the investigators spoke to knew the man seen in the company of either woman prior to her murder. For the first time in their Scottish murder hunt, a composite drawing of the man MacDonald had last been seen alive with was given to the press, being widely distributed on TV and newspapers throughout Scotland in efforts to identify the suspect. Male and female undercover police officers performed discreet surveillance at the Barrowlands and other venues in efforts to identify the person. Police surveillance was ended in late October 1969 due to the initiative's failure to produce any suspects. Detectives were also blamed by proprietors for a sharp decrease in attendance figures. On the 31st of October, a man walking his dog discovered the body of 29-year-old Helen Puttock behind a tenement in the Scotstoun area of the city. Her body was found in the back garden of her Earl Street flat. She had been stripped partially naked, extensively beaten about the face, before being strangled to death. The contents of her handbag had been scattered close to her body, but the bag itself was missing from the crime scene. Grass and weed marks on the soles of her feet and shoes indicated that she had engaged in a ferocious struggle with her killer. She had evidently desperately attempted to scale a nearby railway embankment. Her body also bore a deep bite mark on her wrist. As had been the case with the two previous victims, she had her period at the time of her death. The previous evening, she and her sister, Jean Langford, had been to the Barrowlands where they met two men, both named John. At the end of the evening, all four left to head home. The man who had been Jean's dance partner walked to George Square to board a bus, while Langford, Puttock, and a man who had been Puttock's dance partner hailed a taxi. The trio set off, making a 20-minute journey towards Langford's home. The suspect was described by Puttock's sister as being a tall, slim, and well-dressed man, wearing a brown suit with reddish sandy or fair hair. His watch had a military-style broad leather strap, and, unusually, he was wearing unfashionable leather half-boots. He was aged between 25 and 30, approximately 5 feet 10 inches to 6 foot in height, and had blue-grey eyes. She noticed that two of his front top teeth overlapped. She said that she thought he had said his surname was something like Templeton, Sempleton, or Emerson, and he had been polite and well-spoken. It was also mentioned that he wasn't a Barrowlands type, as the majority of men who frequented the dance hall were somewhat rougher, and she said that he also was not a particularly good dancer. He also quoted from the Bible, something that the media and the police picked up on, hence the name Bible John was created. Before they left, Langford had attempted to use a cigarette machine, which had jammed and failed to dispense her purchase. This incident caused a sudden change in the suspect's previously polite demeanour. He demanded to see the manager, who he argued with aggressively, and asked to know who the local member of Parliament was. He then turned and told the group, "My father said these places are dens of iniquity. They once set fire to this place to get the insurance money and did it up with the money they got." Langford then witnessed the man show Puttock an identity card, which seemed to impress her. When Langford asked to see the ID herself, the man declined and said while tapping his nose, "You know what happens to nosy folk." Much of the information about the suspect came from the conversations the trio had on their 20-minute taxi ride home. The man said he disapproved of married women going to the Barrowlands, and when the women told him they were married, he responded with a reference to the Bible, saying, "You know what happens to the adulterous wife. She gets stoned to death." He also said to the women, "I don't drink at Hogmanay, I pray," although he said that he was familiar with several drinking places in the area. He said he was an only child, but contradicted this soon after by saying he had a sister, adding that alcohol was not allowed in his home, and that when his sister came home drunk one time, she was refused to be let into the house. Langford was of the impression that the man regretted mentioning his sister and tried to redirect the conversation to foster homes and foster children. He revealed that he knew the fares and possibly the times for both the buses and the train services north of the River Clyde. As the taxi travelled along the Kingsway, the man said he recognised the high-rise flats and said something about his father or another relative having worked there and that a children's home had once been there. Langford said the man appeared to be evasive when asked some questions and that he had a Glaswegian accent. Langford last sighted the pair being driven off in the taxi after she was dropped off at her home in Kelso Street. The taxi driver was later traced and provided further details of the last part of the journey, explaining that the man had been unable to pay the fare when they arrived in Earl Street, so Puttock had given him the money to pay. The driver also noticed that after paying the fare, the suspect had caught up with Puttock and grabbed her, causing her to resist, and assumed that the two were simply having a lover's tiff. The murder of Helen Puttock held remarkable similarities to the two previous murders, further raising suspicions that all three had been committed by the same person. Each victim had been the mother of at least one child and had met her murderer at the Barrowlands. The handbag of each woman was missing, and they had been strangled to death. Each of the women had been escorted home by her killer and murdered within yards of their front door, and they all had their periods at the time of their deaths. This led to speculation that the women had been murdered for their refusal to have sex with the murderer. Within hours of the discovery of the body of Helen Puttock, an additional composite drawing of the suspect was created, using the detailed description provided by her sister, who had seen the earlier image and believed it was an excellent likeness. Detective Superintendent Joe Beatty asked the public to study this composite drawing closely, should it resemble anyone they knew. Due to the suspect's hair being unfashionably short for the era, over 450 hairdressers in and around Glasgow were shown the updated drawing of the suspect, and all dentists in and around the city were asked to examine their records to determine whether they held any records that matched the suspect. Both lines of inquiry proved fruitless. In June 1970, police employed the PhotoFit system in an attempt to produce a better likeness of the suspect. This was the first instance this method of identifying a murderer was used in Scotland. More than 100 detectives were assigned to work full-time on the case, and thousands of witness statements were taken in door-to-door inquiries. 5,000 potential suspects were questioned in the first year of the inquiry alone, and Jean Langford attended over 300 identity parades, but did not recognise anybody, and all were cleared of any involvement. Despite the extensive manhunt, the case went cold, and the investigators reassigned. It was felt the man had either moved away or died, jailed for an unrelated offence, or that senior police officers had known his actual identity, but had been unable to prove he had committed the murders, or that he only committed murder when he was in Glasgow. Over the decades, several names have been in the frame who could have been Bible John. In 2005, a detective reckoned that he had identified a likely suspect at the time, but that he was dismissed simply because he did not have notably overlapping front teeth. The man had been found arguing with a young woman in the Barrowlands, and was said that he closely resembled the facial composite of Bible John. The man, when questioned subsequently, had supplied police with a false name and address, before revealing his true details, and that he was in fact from Glasgow and was called John Edgar. A police officer had taken the same man to a hospital after arresting him outside the Barrowlands at the time of the murders. The suspect had needed several stitches in his head following an altercation, and as soon as his handcuffs had been released, He escaped from the hospital. He had also falsely given his name to medical staff as John White. These combined facts led to detectives to believe he may have been the perpetrator. The man eventually came forward and provided a DNA sample in order to clear his name. This led to his elimination as a suspect. In the years following the Bible John murders, several women came forward to claim that they had been sexually assaulted after an evening at the Barrowlands. One of these women, Hannah Martin, claimed that she had been assaulted and raped by Bible John and had subsequently given birth to his child in January 1970 and had a daughter she named Isabel. In April the previous year, Martin had left the Barrowlands in the company of a tall man with whom she had then had sex and then accepted his offer of a lift home. During the journey, the man's demeanor became more aggressive, and Martin, drunk and terrified that she may be attacked, vomited in the man's car. He then bundled her out and drove off, leaving her standing on the pavement. In 1996, Strathclyde police exhumed the body of John McInnes, who had committed suicide at the age of 41 in 1980. He was the cousin of one of the original suspects in the investigation and related to a senior police officer. He had not been picked out in an identity parade. A DNA sample was taken for comparison with samples from the stockings of Helen Puttock, which had been used to strangle her. The results of the testing proved inconclusive, and the Crown officially cleared McInnes of any involvement in the Bible John murders. There had been around that time a claim that police chiefs covered up the identity of Bible John and alleged he was John McInnes, who was the cousin of a senior police officer, and that he was always kept out of official records. It was speculated that convicted serial killer Peter Tobin, sentenced for 3 horrific murders in 2006, may have been Bible John. He had lived in Glasgow in the late 1960s and then relocated to England in August 1969 before the final 2 murders were committed, after marrying his first wife, who he met at the Barrowlands in 1968. The amount of violence Tobin inflicted on his known victims and his level of organisation did not suggest the work of an amateur, leading some to believe he may have killed prior to his first known victims. One discrepancy is that Bible John left his victims' bodies in public places, whereas Tobin buried all of his. Some contemporary visual similarities exist between Tobin, when aged in his 20s, and the 1969 composite drawing of Bible John. All 3 of Tobin's former wives had given accounts of being repeatedly imprisoned, throttled, beaten, and raped by him, and each stated he had been driven to extreme physical violence by the female menstrual cycle, a factor long suspected by investigators as being Bible John's motive behind the murders. Tobin is known to have been a staunch Roman Catholic with strong religious views. After a DNA sample was checked, Tobin was eliminated as a suspect by the police. No other murders in the United Kingdom are thought to have been committed by Bible John, and the brutal slayings of the 3 women remains unsolved and sadly unresolved to this day. The cases do remain open, with many in the police force remaining certain that the perpetrator was highly likely to have been shielded by one or more individuals he had known. No single consensus exists that the 3 murders were actually done by the same person. Was the gap of 18 months between the first 2 killings unusual for a serial killer? Criticism has also been levelled against the police for potentially hampering their own investigation by prematurely jumping to the conclusion that all 3 murders had been committed by the same person.